The signal from the edge of the void. Deep in the heart of the Nari research station, nestled among the stars, Divoe sat frozen in his chair. His eyes, a striking shade of silver, stared at the screen in front of him, pupils narrowing as he processed the data flooding in. He had been working for hours, scanning through hundreds of transmissions from various corners of the galaxy, but this was different. The readings were unlike anything the Nari had ever encountered. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the controls. The signals were coming from a planet in a distant solar system, one that shouldn't have been able to sustain life. Its gravity was nearly 3 times that of the Nari's home world. Life couldn't exist there, or so they had always believed. Summi. Divoe's voice broke the silence, shaking slightly from the excitement bubbling inside him. You need to see this. The doors to the command center slid open, and senior researcher Summi entered. Tall, graceful, with skin like polished silver, she moved silently through the room, her long fingers brushing against the console as she approached. Her presence was commanding, yet serene, traits that came with age and experience in the galaxy's most prestigious scientific community. Divoe stepped aside, making space for her to examine the data. Look at these readings. There's something coming from this planet, something alive, he said, pointing to the swirling patterns on the display. Summi's sharp gaze flicked over the screen, her expression unreadable. Impossible, she murmured, her voice a soft whisper. This world has gravity levels that would crush anything with a soft body, like ours. Divoe's mind raced as he played back the signals. They weren't static or random noise, but coherent broadcasts, voices, music, and strange images. It's not just noise, he said, his voice tinged with awe. It's structured communication. They're talking, singing, sharing stories. This is more than a random signal. Summi's brow furrowed as she leaned closer to the screen. Her fingers hovered above the interface, tracing the complex patterns. It's too dangerous to be real, she whispered, her voice thick with skepticism. Life could never survive under those conditions. We've encountered species from heavy worlds before. They were all stronger, faster, and far more aggressive than us. Divoe wasn't convinced. But what if this is something different, he urged. What if these creatures, these humans, have evolved in a way we don't understand? What if their strength doesn't mean they are a threat? A long silence filled the room as Summi mulled over his words. Her silver eyes reflected the data, swirling in patterns of light as they studied the signals together. Finally, she sighed and gave a slight nod. Write your report, Divoe. Include everything. Every detail about their culture, their communications, their history. She paused, her voice softening. Maybe you're right. Maybe not all strong species are dangerous. With a sense of both excitement and trepidation, Divoe turned back to the console, his mind already racing with possibilities. The more he studied the broadcasts, the more intrigued he became. The humans, those creatures from the so-called Deathworld, were talking about helping each other after natural disasters, about finding peace after war, about building a world not through domination, but through cooperation. Look at this, Divoe whispered, almost to himself. They're telling stories about heroes, not of power, but of kindness. These humans, they fight for each other, they heal the sick, they offer aid to others who aren't even their own kind. His heart pounded faster. What if they are different from the monsters we've been taught to fear? Summi stood silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady. I will bring this before the council, but remember we are not just sending a message. We are sending a challenge to everything we have ever known. As the days passed and Divoe compiled his report, he found himself fixated on one thought. What if humanity, those beings from a world they feared, were the answer to something far greater than any of them could have imagined? What if they could teach the Nari that true strength wasn't in crushing others, but in protecting them? The risk of hope. 3 weeks had passed since Divoe's discovery, but the weight of anticipation felt like years. Inside the Nari space station, A constant hum filled the air as the research complex prepared for something unprecedented. Today was the day the council would convene to discuss the human transmissions. Doe's heart raced as he stood at the observation window, staring out into the deep, infinite expanse of space. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of his people, humanity thrived on a death world that had once been deemed uninhabitable. Sunmi stood beside him, her calm demeanor barely hiding the tension in her posture. "This could change everything," Doe whispered, more to himself than to Sunmi. "If they listen, if they understand what I've found." "They won't," Sunmi replied fatly, her voice like a cold wind. "They never listen to anything that challenges their beliefs. You know the council. They've always feared the unknown, especially when it comes to power." Dioe turned to face her, his silver eyes wide with uncertainty. "But they're different. These humans, they had wars, yes, but they've also come together after the battles. They help each other. They create. I think they could teach us something." Sunmi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched as other members of the scientific community gathered in the distant meeting hall. Each Nari scientist was tall and elegant, with silver skin and sharp minds. But none had ever seen anything like the humans. The thought of making contact with such a species was, for many, a terrifying prospect. A species that could survive on a world like Earth was not to be taken lightly. They could be powerful, ruthless, and cruel, just like every other deathworlder. The hum of the station's gravity generators shifted slightly, and Sunmi sighed. "I hope you're right, Doe, but I've seen the council's decisions before. This is too much of a gamble." As they walked toward the council chamber, Doe's mind raced. He had spent countless hours analyzing the human broadcasts, looking for any signs of aggression or hostility. Instead, he found something else: resilience, compassion, and the kind of community that had helped them survive on a planet that was literally trying to crush them. They weren't just survivors, they were creators, healers, and protectors. The chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss. The air inside was thick with tension, as if every scientist in the room was holding their breath. The council, a group of elder Nari whose wisdom was revered across the galaxy, was seated at the long, sleek table at the front of the room. Their eyes, like molten silver, turned toward Doe as he entered. "I trust you have something significant to present to us, Doe." The voice of Councillor Rail, the oldest and most respected member, echoed through the chamber. His tone was neutral, yet it carried the weight of centuries of decision-making. Doe stepped forward, his hands steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Yes, Councillor, I have discovered something extraordinary, something that could change the future of our people." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I have been monitoring transmissions from a planet in a distant system. The species that calls this world home, humans, are unlike anything we've encountered before." A murmur rippled through the room, but Councillor Rail raised his hand, silencing the others. "You claim that this species, these humans, are different, but what makes them so special, Doe? Why should we risk contacting them, especially when our records show that their kind has waged brutal wars across their world? And as you said, their planet is far too dangerous to even think of visiting." Doe's silver eyes flashed with determination. "I understand the risks, but I believe they're not what our records suggest. I've studied their broadcasts. They're not just fighting wars, they're rebuilding. They heal their sick, they help each other after natural disasters, they even provide aid to other species on their world." He paused, looking around the room, his voice growing more passionate. "They're a species that has not only survived the harshest of conditions, they've thrived because of their unity. They are strong, yes, but their strength isn't just for conquering. They use it to protect, to create, to help." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Councillor Rail spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "And what makes you so sure, Doe, that this is not another deathworlder trap? How can you be certain these humans will not turn on us, just as other species have when given the opportunity?" Doe clenched his fists, trying to control the surge of emotion. because I believe in what they've shown us. The broadcasts, they speak of love, of community, of heroes saving others not out of necessity, but out of choice. These humans, if they are anything like their broadcasts suggest, could be a new kind of ally. They may not just be powerful, they may be exactly what we need to face the challenges ahead. There was a long, heavy silence. The council members exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Dewey could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. Finally, Councillor Rail spoke again. You ask us to put our faith in these humans, to trust that they are different from the others we've encountered. We have never made such a decision lightly, DOA. Your report is compelling, but it's based on broadcasts, one-sided messages from a world we know little about. DOA felt the crushing weight of doubt begin to creep in, but he stood firm. I don't ask you to trust them blindly. I ask you to give them a chance. A chance to show us that strength doesn't always mean violence. A chance to prove that power can be used for good. The council was still, the room thick with thought. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Councillor Rail nodded slowly. We will deliberate on this matter, DOA. You will be informed of our decision shortly. As DOA left the chamber, his mind raced. He had spoken with everything he had, but he knew the council would not make their decision easily. The fate of the Nari's future, and possibly the fate of the galaxy, was now in their hands. Would they take a chance on the unknown? Or would they let fear dictate their actions once more? The unexpected arrival. The days following the council's deliberation dragged on like a slow-moving river, each moment stretching endlessly before DOA. Despite his optimism, a shadow of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Would the council really take the risk? Would they be brave enough to consider that humanity, a species from a planet born of chaos and adversity, might hold the key to a future they could never have imagined? The entire Nari research station was alive with whispers. Some believed that the humans were a threat, a new species to be feared like all the others before them. Others, though fewer in number, shared Doa's belief that these humans might be something different, something worth exploring, understanding, and potentially allying with. 3 days after the council's closed-door meeting, Doa found himself standing in the observation hall once again, watching as a faint glow appeared on the station's radar. It was subtle at first, a small flicker on the edge of the known star system, but it was unmistakable. His heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him. They've come. A sudden wave of anxiety hit him, making his stomach tighten. Had the council made a decision? Did the humans know about them? And more importantly, were they coming in peace? Before he could dwell on the questions, the station's speakers came to life, their voice calm but urgent. Attention all personnel. A foreign craft is approaching. Unknown origin. Prepare for first contact. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Duo felt a surge of adrenaline rush through him, his mind racing. He had never been part of a first contact scenario. The Nari had avoided such situations for centuries, preferring to observe rather than interact. But now, everything was about to change. Sunli entered the observation hall beside him, her expression unreadable. She had always been the pragmatic one, the scientist who trusted data over hope. But even she couldn't hide the tension in her posture as she watched the radar. It's them, she said quietly, more to herself than to DOA. The craft slowly edged closer, its shape becoming clearer. It was unlike anything DOA had seen before, rough, angular, and seemingly cobbled together from various materials. But what struck him most was the sheer determination emanating from it. The craft wasn't elegant or sleek like Nari ships. It was a testament to survival, a machine built for function, not beauty. Human engineering, Sunmi muttered, her voice filled with both awe and disbelief. It's nothing like we've ever seen. The station's systems worked to life, guiding the ship's trajectory into the docking bay. The crew inside the craft was preparing for the unknown. Dewey could feel his heart pounding in his chest. They were about to meet the humans face to face. There was no turning back now. As the ship docked with the station, a strange silence fell over the research hall. The heavy metallic doors slid open, and standing there in the threshold was the last thing DOA expected, not a massive, intimidating warrior, but a small group of humans. Their leader, a woman with short brown hair, wearing a plain but worn suit, stepped forward with a calm demeanor that immediately disarmed DOA's fears. She looked like someone who had seen hardship and survived it. "Hello," the woman said, her voice surprisingly warm, though tinged with caution. "I'm Captain Elara of the United Earth Federation. We come in peace." DOA's heart skipped. Peace? Was this really possible? Could humans, a species from a planet filled with strife, really offer peace to a race like the Nari, who had long feared the strength of other species? Sami was the first to speak, her voice measured. "Captain Elara, welcome to our station. We've been studying your broadcasts and we have many questions." The captain nodded, seemingly unfazed by the Nari's intimidating presence. "We know," she said, "and we're here to answer them. But first, we need to talk. Not just about you or us, but about something bigger. Something that involves both our species." DOA felt a strange feeling in his chest, a mixture of excitement and dread. The humans had come to them with an offer. But what was it? Was it truly peace? Or was it something else? "We came because we believe in the possibility of alliance," Captain Elara continued, her eyes scanning the room, making direct eye contact with Sami and then with DOA. "We've been watching you too, and we know your people have always avoided conflict with other species. But we've been facing a threat, one that could destroy both our worlds, and we need your help." A cold shiver ran down DOA's spine. A threat. What could possibly pose a danger to both their species? Captain Elara stepped closer, her voice lowering. "There are other civilizations out there, ones that would destroy us both. We've been tracking them for months, and they're coming. We need allies, and we believe that your species, your wisdom, your ability to remain neutral, your strength in avoiding war, can help us survive what's coming." DOA exchanged a look with Sami. The weight of the moment hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about making contact anymore. It wasn't just about studying the humans and their broadcasts. It was about survival. The survival of not just their species, but of their entire way of life. "We've seen their ships," Captain Elara continued, her voice low and serious. "And we know they're coming for us. It'll crush us if we don't stand together." DOA's mind reeled with the implications of her words. The Nari had never fought a war, never needed to. They had always survived by avoiding conflict, by remaining distant from the more dangerous species. But now there was no avoiding it. The threat was real, and it was coming for them all. Sami turned to DOA, her face pale. "This changes everything." DOA could barely find his voice. "You're asking us to fight, to help you. We don't even know what we're facing." Captain Elara's eyes hardened. "You will. But first, we need to know if we can trust you. Can we trust that your people are willing to stand with us, even against a threat we don't fully understand?" DOA didn't hesitate. "We'll stand with you, if the Council agrees." Preparing for the unknown. The weeks that followed the arrival of Captain Elara and her crew were a whirlwind of activity. The Nari, who had once prided themselves on their peaceful existence, now found themselves thrust into the heart of a conflict they hadn't asked for. Yet the presence of the humans, resilient, determined, and desperate, was a constant reminder that their way of life was no longer sustainable in a universe full of threats. The quiet, peaceful Nari had always kept to themselves, watching from a distance. But now the shadows of war were creeping closer, and it was impossible to ignore. DOA stood in the station's war room, staring at the massive holographic map that flickered above the table. The image of the galaxy spread out before him, the many star systems blinking like distant, unreachable beacons. But now there was a new presence in the dark corners of space. The enemy, the threat. They were out there, and they were coming. "What are we up against?" DOA's voice was sharp as he leaned over the map, eyes narrowing at the data flowing across the holographic display. "Give me the full report." Captain Elara was seated across from him, her expression grim. She had stripped away her formalities. Gone was the polite, diplomatic captain. In her place was the battle-hardened leader who had led her crew through wars, betrayals, and losses. She was here now because the survival of both their species depended on it. "We don't owe everything," she began, tapping the map to highlight a cluster of red dots at the edge of the map. "But we've been tracking these ships for months. We call them the Vrosk. They're a war-hungry, expansionist species that has conquered countless worlds, absorbing or annihilating anyone who stands in their way. Their ships are massive, built for war, tough, fast, and heavily armed." DOA studied the Vrosk's path, his mind racing. "So they've been wiping out entire species without mercy?" "Yes," Captain Elara replied, her tone unwavering. "They have no mercy. The Vrosk don't negotiate. They don't make peace. They just take. They're coming here, to your star system, and if we don't stop them, they'll destroy everything we've built." DOA took a slow, steady breath. The Nari had never known the kind of brutality the humans had. Yes, they had been aware of wars between other species, of the occasional skirmish or invasion. But the Vrosk were something different. They weren't interested in diplomacy. They weren't interested in understanding or coexistence. They were driven by a single, all-consuming desire to conquer, to dominate, and to erase anything that stood in their way. "We've never fought before," DOA said, the words heavy in the air. "Our species doesn't know war. We've never had to fight for survival." Captain Elara looked him in the eyes, her voice firm. "Then it's time to learn." A chill ran through DOA's body. He had heard stories of war, of destruction, of the horrors that came when two powerful forces clashed. But he had never truly believed that it would come to this. The Nari had always avoided conflict. Their planet was peaceful, their technology advanced, but they had never been tested. They had always believed that strength was best used for creating, not destroying. Yet here they were, facing a species that would stop at nothing to crush them both. Sunmi, who had been silently observing the conversation, spoke up. "We've always been a peaceful species, DOA. But if what Captain Elara says is true, then we cannot afford to remain passive. We cannot hide forever." DOA looked over at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Sunmi was the pragmatist, the scientist who always calculated risk. And she was right. If the Vrosk were as dangerous as the humans believed, there would be no peaceful resolution. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting for the future of their people, their children, and their way of life. "I don't know how to fight," DOA admitted, the admission hanging in the air like a confession. "I don't know where to begin." "You don't need to fight alone," Captain Elara said. "We've trained for this. We've fought wars on Earth, against enemies who were just as relentless as the Vrosk. I'll teach you, and I'll show you how to defend yourselves. You may not be soldiers, but you have something the Vrosk will never understand. The will to protect, the will to survive. That's something stronger than any weapon." Deloy looked at her, his doubts melting away. He had seen the humans' broadcasts, their stories of heroes, of people who fought not for conquest, but for the protection of others. It wasn't the power of their weapons that made them strong. It was their ability to unite, to fight for what was right. That was something DOA could understand. He didn't need to wield a weapon to be strong. He needed the strength to protect his people, his world. Sunmi nodded, as if reaching the same conclusion. "Then we will learn," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We will learn from you. We will do what it takes to protect our people." With that, a new chapter began for the Nari. The old ways, of watching from the sidelines, of avoiding confrontation, were over. They had made their choice. They would stand with the humans, not as passive observers, but as allies. Together, they would face the Vrosk and whatever other dangers the universe threw at them. The question was no longer whether they could survive. The question now was whether they could fight. The first strike. The days that followed were unlike anything DOA had ever experienced. The research station, once a place of calm observation and study, had become a bustling hub of activity, filled with new technology, unfamiliar faces, and a growing sense of urgency. The Nari were no longer passive observers of the universe. They were participants, caught in the maelstrom of an impending war that threatened everything they held dear. Captain Elara had been clear from the start. Time was their enemy. The Vrosk were coming faster than anticipated, and every day they delayed was another day the enemy got closer. There was no more time for research or debate. The Nari had to act. DOA stood on the observation deck, his eyes fixed on the stars. His mind was elsewhere, on the Vrosk, on the humans, on everything that had changed in such a short period of time. His once peaceful life, studying distant stars and recording strange signals, felt like a distant memory now. The only thing that mattered was the war. The Nari had no military history, no experience in battle. They had always relied on diplomacy, on negotiation, on staying out of harm's way. But now they were being forced into the fight. He wasn't alone on the deck. Sami stood beside him, staring out at the same expanse of stars. There was a quiet intensity in her gaze, an unspoken determination that mirrored his own. "Do you think we're ready?" Doe asked, his voice carrying the weight of the question. Sami didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the stars, her fingers tapping absently against the railing. "No," she said finally, her voice low. "But we don't have a choice. We have to be." DOA nodded, his mind racing. There were still so many unknowns, so many variables. The Nari had never fought before. How could they possibly stand against an enemy like the Vrosk, who had been waging war for centuries? The humans had trained them in the basics: combat tactics, defense strategies, and survival techniques. But it wasn't enough. It couldn't be. They were outmatched in every way. Captain Elara said, "We have the advantage of surprise." Sami continued, her voice measured. "We may not have the firepower or the numbers, but we have the element of surprise on our side. The Vrosk don't expect us to fight. They think we're just a peaceful species with no will to resist. If we strike first, we strike hard." DOA finished for her. It was a strategy of desperation, but it was the only one they had. The Nari couldn't afford to wait for the Vrosk to make the first move. They needed to hit first, to show the enemy that they were not to be underestimated. The sound of footsteps behind them interrupted their thoughts. Captain Elara walked into the observation room, her expression grim but focused. She was a commander now, not just a diplomat. The weight of responsibility was evident in her eyes. "It's time," she said, her voice steady. "The Vrosk will arrive in this system within the next 2 days. Our scouts have confirmed that their fleet is massive, far larger than we anticipated. But we're ready. I've spoken with your council, DOA, and they've agreed to support the first strike." DOA turned to her, his pulse quickening. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. "How do we strike back?" he asked. Captain Elara gestured to the holographic display in the center of the room, where the map of the star system glowed ominously. "We hit their fleet before they reach the planet. We can't let them establish a foothold. Our best chance is to intercept them in deep space, where they won't expect a counterattack." Sami crossed her arms, analyzing the map. "It's risky. Their fleet is heavily armed, and our forces are limited. But if we can cripple their command ship, it could send the rest of the fleet into disarray. They'll be forced to retreat or scatter." Elara nodded. "Exactly. We target their command ship first. If we can take that out, their coordination will break down, and the rest of their forces will become chaotic. That's when we strike with everything we've got." DOA's mind whirled with the possibilities. A direct assault on the Vrosk command ship would be a brutal gamble. It was a forceful strategy, one that relied on precision and timing. If they succeeded, they could weaken the enemy enough to force them to retreat. But if they failed, if the Nari couldn't disrupt the Vrosk fleet, then they'd be facing a full-scale invasion of their home system. He swallowed hard. And if we fail? Captain Elara's eyes met his, unblinking. Then we fight, and we fight until we win. Her words were cold, calculated, but beneath the surface, DOA could sense the underlying fear. Even Captain Elara, with all her experience, couldn't hide the terror of facing an enemy like the Vrosk. But there was no other choice. They had to try. For their people, for their future, and for the fragile alliance between the Nari and humanity. The Nari and human forces spent the next 48 hours preparing. Teoi worked with the humans, learning how to operate their ships, to make quick decisions under pressure, and to use their newfound weapons. It wasn't easy. The Nari were a peaceful species, and every movement felt foreign, every instinct uncomfortable. But they adapted quickly, as they had always done in their history. Survival, after all, was the most basic of instincts. By the time the Vrosk fleet came into view on the station's scanners, the Nari were ready. The research station had transformed into a military base, with warships now docked alongside research vessels. Captain Elara stood at the helm of one of the human ships, a sleek craft designed for speed and maneuverability. "We've trained for this," Elara said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "Now it's time to see if we can make it count." Divoe stood beside her, his hand gripping the console. His heart was racing, his mind was spinning with the weight of everything that was at stake. But deep down, he knew this was their only chance. The Vrosk were ruthless, but they were not invincible. They had to believe that the strength of their unity, the will to protect their worlds, could overcome the threat that loomed just beyond the stars. As the Vrosk fleet entered the system, the final countdown began. Into the heart of the storm. The stars outside flickered in their usual serene dance, oblivious to the storm that was about to explode in their midst. The Nari shipyards, once silent and pristine, were now abuzz with activity as ships of every size and shape prepared for battle. The alliance between the humans and the Nari had been forged in the fires of necessity, but it was now the only hope for both species' survival. Dewey stood on the command deck, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on him like the gravity of a planet. "Everything's in place," Captain Elara's voice was sharp, focused, and carried the unmistakable authority that had won her the respect of both her crew and the Nari. She paced before the holographic tactical display, her eyes flicking across the data streams that now filled the air with flashing icons and red warning signs. "Are we ready to engage?" Doe asked, his voice betraying none of the nervousness that churned inside him. Elara looked at him, her steely gaze locking with his. "We're ready. But once we make contact, there's no turning back. The Vrosk won't give up easily. We'll have to hit them hard and fast." Doe nodded. He wasn't sure how he felt about war, but one thing was certain. If they didn't fight now, their world, his world, would be consumed by the Vrosk. He had no illusions about the enemy they faced. The Vrosk were not just invaders. They were a force of nature, relentless and brutal. They cared little for diplomacy and less for mercy. The only language they understood was force. The human fleet, under Captain Elara's command, had taken position at the far edge of the system, well out of the Vrosk's detection range. The Nari ships, though fewer in number, were silently slipping into formation behind them. For all their technological advancement, the Nari had never faced a real battle before, and the cold reality of it was sinking in. This wasn't going to be some peaceful diplomatic mission, it was survival. Initiating long-range scan now, Sami's voice broke through the tension in the air. The lead Nari ship, the Vela, was already locked in place behind the human flagship. Sami had been working alongside the human engineers to adapt the Nari vessels for combat, and although the designs were alien to her people, there was a growing sense of confidence in their unified effort. "Vrosk fleet is 5 light minutes away and closing," Sami reported, her tone calm but urgent. "We've got a brief window before they detect us." Elara's fingers moved swiftly across her control panel. "Engage cloaking devices," she ordered, and the entire fleet slipped into invisibility, their ships now invisible to enemy scanners. In the cold silence of space, only the beating of their hearts told them they were still alive. DOA stood frozen, his mind racing. What would happen when they struck? Would the Vrosk be prepared? Could they even hold their own in such a conflict? He thought back to the stories of humanity's resilience, the battles they had fought, the many enemies they had faced. The stories weren't just tales. They were the foundation of the strategy they were about to enact. "I trust you've all studied the plan," Captain Elara's voice cut through the tension. "Our target is the Vrosk flagship. It's heavily guarded, but if we can get close enough, we can breach their outer defenses. The rest of their fleet will fall into disarray." DOA nodded, understanding the magnitude of their mission. If they could take down the Vrosk flagship, it would cripple the enemy's entire war effort. It wasn't just a victory, it would be a statement. It would prove that even the smallest, most peaceful species could rise up and fight back against tyranny. The first strike. The minutes ticked by in agonizing slowness as they waited. Then, as if the universe itself held its breath, a warning light blinked red. "Vrosk fleet has detected us." Sami's voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the urgency in her tone. "They've powered up their weapons." "Activate shields," Elara shouted, slamming her hand on the panel. "Brace for impact." The silence of space was shattered by the sudden hum of energy shields activating, the very air inside the ship vibrating as the first blast from the Vrosk fleet made contact. The Vela shuddered under the force of the blast, but the shields held. "For now." "Return fire," Elara commanded. A cacophony of alarms rang out across the ships as they leaped into action. Energy beams and missiles lit up the void as the Nari and human ships engaged the Vrosk forces. The Vrosk fleet, vast and imposing, was everything the humans had described: relentless, aggressive, and unyielding. The first exchange of fire was chaotic, a blur of flashing lights and evasive maneuvers. DOA watched in awe as human and Nari ships worked together, weaving between enemy fire, unleashing calculated bursts of energy that made the Vrosk fleet falter. "We've got a breach in their outer shield," Sami reported, her eyes glowing with concentration. "We can get through." "Time to hit them where it hurts," Captain Elara said, her lips curling into a determined smile. DOA's heart pounded in his chest as the plan shifted into high gear. This was it, the battle for their survival. The Nari weren't soldiers, but they were learning fast. They were adapting with every passing second, driven by the desperate will to survive. The Vela surged forward, its engines burning with power as it moved into position for the final strike. They were close now, close enough to see the massive silhouette of the Vrosk flagship looming ahead. Its hull was scarred and armored, built for destruction, but it was not invincible. Nothing was. "Ready all torpedoes," Captain Elara barked. "We breach the outer hull and disable their engines." DOA's hands clenched into fists as the human ship inched closer to the Vrosk flagship. The adrenaline coursed through him as they approached, the massive Vrosk vessel now towering before them, a sight that would have terrified him only days ago. But now it was their target, their symbol of defiance. "We're in range," Elara said. "Fire." The first torpedo flew with a blistering speed, slamming into the outer defenses of the Vrosk flagship. A deafening explosion lit up space as the hull of the ship buckled under the force. The Vrosk fleet screamed in retaliation, but the humans and Nari didn't falter. They were united now, not just in purpose, but in spirit. They had faced the storm together, and now they were in the heart of it.